Hi, trending topics. This is Miss Corey. Welcome to U1-L6, picking a good news source. So, first question, in your own words, what does bias mean? Or what do you think of when you hear the word bias? Now, I'm going to get a lot of different answers on that ed puzzle, and that's okay. So, here's the definition of bias from the Oxford Dictionary: a strong feeling in favor of or against one group of people or one side in an argument, often not based on fair judgment. So, what is an example of a biased opinion or action? There are lots of examples you probably could have come up with. For example, if this lady told that lady, you are way too old to understand this, that would be ageism. So that's a bias, see? Or if this coach told this tennis player, you're just not good enough to play with the males, that would be an example of sexism, which is also a bias. And also racism. So it says racism spreads with virus. So the rise in anti Chinese sentiments during the heart of COVID 19. And of course, there is a ton of political biases, especially today in the media. So, big hot topics are also very biased when it comes to politics. And there's dozens of other types of biases as well. There's a whole Wikipedia page on them too, just in case you're interested. So, everyone has biases. We all do. I do, you do, everyone does. Biases form due to family and friend opinions, community influence, media we consume, so like social media, books, TV, movies, that kind of stuff, personal experiences, and societal stereotypes. What I hope for this course: first off, you can spot biases in the media. Second, you can ask questions about media sources. And third, you can break some of those biases in your mind. So, we'll talk about biases a little bit later, but right now, I want to talk about how to choose a non bias ish source. So, what do you think is a way to spot media biases? Be that in newspaper, social media, online articles, TV, radio, etc. So, there are five big questions I want you to ask when it comes to looking at news sources about biases. So, the first question I want you to ask is, who are the sources? Two, from whose point of view is the news reported? Three, is there a lack of diversity? Four, is the language loaded? And five, do the headlines and stories match? So let's go through some examples together. So the first one again was, who are the sources? The sources is where the information is coming from. So sources with true and solid evidence means that's a good, reliable news source. But sources with false or vague evidence, that means it's probably pretty bad and untrustworthy. So here's an example of one. Who are the sources? So, volunteers hope to restore Camp Parsons in Watertown, site of many memories for North Minneapolis children. So, in the article, it says Watertown, Minnesota. As summer camp season comes to an end, the hope is one local camp story is just beginning. WCCO went west of the metro to Watertown, where there's a place known as the magical Camp Parsons. Stephanie Young Simmons is a Camp Parson alum. So, looking at this, is this a good source? I would say yes, because first of all, WCCO went out to Watertown to the location itself, and they interviewed one of the camp's former members, the Stephanie Young Simmons lady. All right, here's another example. So this one says Mark Zuckerberg, dead at 32, denies Facebook has problem with fake news. The shovel. So what are these sources? This is just a random Facebook link, and anybody can just make a Facebook story. And who told the shovel that Mark Zuckerberg is dead? Where are they getting this information? And I've never, ever, ever heard of the shovel before. What even is this news source? All right, let's go down to the second question. From whose point of view is the news reported? So, this is an article that says, crying myself to sleep on the biggest cruise ship ever. The ship makes no sense, vertically or horizontally. It makes no sense on sea or on land or in outer space. It looks like a hodgepodge of domes and minarets, tubes, and canopies like Istanbul had it be designed by idiots. So, first of all, what about the other people on the cruise? So, this one person, this Gary guy, he's saying it was a horrible cruise, but maybe there's someone else there that really enjoyed it. And what about the engineers who designed the ship? What would they say about being called a hodgepodge of domes? Would they agree with that? All right, the third question. Is there a lack of diversity? So, new Minnesota state seal and face flag face criticism and receive support. So, this one says Minnesota elected officials give the state a history making gift to mark its 166th birthday on Saturday, but not everyone appreciates the gestures, as a recent poll suggests about half the Minnesota population favors the old flag. All right, so this news article, it refers to this recent poll, but it doesn't link the poll and it doesn't say anywhere about this poll. So what poll are they talking about? When was this poll taken? Was it recent? Was it like 10 years ago? Who answered the poll? What kind of people would answer this kind of question? And what people were asked? Was it people that were just living in Minneapolis and St. Paul? Was it just people who were living in Duluth? They don't specify. So that should raise a big question mark. 4, is the language loaded? So that means like words or phrases are biased towards a view favored by the person using them. So pretty much is an over exaggeration of words. So, for example, this one's like nuclear apocalypse over Ukraine. Why crazed Putin can't back down. So, again, there is, as far as we know, no nuclear warfare. There isn't an apocalypse. There's not this craze, not to ensure survival. Those are all very, very, very loaded words, and they're very extreme, and they're used to make people feel emotions. Or this one too, "The war is on. Britney flaunts a dump him t-shirt." So is this actually a war? No, they're not fighting in the trenches or anything like that. It's just a relationship breakup. All right, the fifth questions. Do the headlines and stories match? So cows lose their jobs as milk prices drop. So is this article really talking about cows losing their job? I mean, they're just cows. They don't really have a job. They don't like work in an office cubicle. All right, so again, here are the 5 questions you should ask about biases. So, what questions do you have about these 5 questions to ask about biases? And if you don't have any, that's okay too. You can just type none. All right, now let's take a little practice quiz. I'm going to show you a headline, and you're going to tell me which of the 5 biases questions you should ask about the headline. This is not going to be graded on what is right or wrong. Just try your very best. So here's my first question. Tell me which of the 5 bias questions you should ask about this headline. Sarah Palin calls to boycott Mall of America because Santa was always white in the Bible. Yeah, probably the first one, right? This is just coming from Facebook. So where are the sources? No one really knows because it's coming from Facebook. Facebook is notorious for not sharing sources. All right, now tell me which of the 5 biases questions you should ask about this headline. So this is from the Minnesota Daily. It says ranked 5 ice cream spots near the U of M. With one of Minnesota's snowiest winters on record approaching its demise, hopefully, it's time to welcome back frozen treats on warmer days. I set out on behalf of A&E to taste test 5 ice cream spots near campus and rank them. Here are my thoughts. So for me, I thought this would be number 2 and number 3. So number 2, from whose point of view is the news reported? I don't really know. What kind of biases did this Josh Bardrews have? Does he even like ice cream? I don't know. And number 3, is there a lack of diversity? So it's just one guy going out and taste testing these ice creams. He might like something that's actually really awful. So there's definitely a lack of diversity. All right, now tell me which of the 5 biases questions you should ask about this headline. Minnesota's most famous restaurants you need to visit ASAP. So again, I thought number 2, number 3. So from whose point of view is this news reported? It's not really telling me much about the author. It's like, well, how do they know what's the most famous restaurants? Like, that's gonna vary depending on where you come from in Minnesota. And is there a lack of diversity? Again, if this is just one person's opinion, that's just one person. Like, they might think some awesome restaurants are great, but they're in reality really awful. All right, here's the fourth question. Tell me which of the 5 biases questions you should ask about this headline. Oh, baby, welcome to the firm. So for this one, I thought number 5. Do the headlines and stories match? So there's a baby at a law firm? No. This article is about a baby who was born to Meghan Markle, who's that lady there, who played a lawyer on TV. But the headline's really misleading. It's like, wow, did a baby become a lawyer? Are they in a law firm now? Very deceiving. All right, and then this one. Inside Michael's chamber of death. Tell me which of the 5 biasy questions you should ask about this headline. Is the language loaded? A literal chamber of death? 10,000 pills? This is pretty extreme wording. All right. So since we went through those examples, again, I'm only grading if you give me a best educated guess. I'm not grading if there's right or wrong, because other people might have different opinions than what I shared about why each of these examples matched up to which questions. But before we move on, what questions do you have about these 5 questions to ask about biases? And if you don't have any, that's okay. Just type none. All right, let's wrap this up. Now you know a little more about biases. Now you know a few tools to spot good and bad news articles. All news sources will have at least a tiny bit of biases, but some news articles have way more biases than others. So, in order to help you, I made a list of news sources. So just keep mindful where these news sources fall on the biases. Next week, we'll talk a little bit more about biases. So the list to news sources I have, and I'll share with this Schoology as well, is going to be this document right here. It's called All Sides Media Bias Chart. It's very helpful. So it kind of ranks the different news sources, especially some of the big like national news sources that we see a lot in the United States, into these categories of being like very left or very right or somewhere in the middle. So when finding news articles, I highly suggest that you only stick to these 3 columns here, because going too far to the left or going too far to the right, you're going to cause biases. So stick right here to these 3 middle columns. All right. And then, there's also links to all of the news sources, by the way, too, that I put on here as well. So I try to make things easy in this class. I know. All right. So next up, you're going to watch U1-L6, What is a Weekly Rundown? If you have any questions, please let me know. I'm more than happy to help you out. Thanks for watching. Bye.